Please can you remind me if you'll be so kind, staring out into space, asking God to hear my case, trying to think of all things past. How long will my memory last? The purple angel, purple angel, purple angel, you're next to me.
Welcome, everyone, to Alzheimer's Speaks Radio. I am Lori LeBay, the host and founder of Alzheimer's Speaks. We get a lot of new listeners all the time, so I'd just like to tell you a little bit about us. Basically, we're an advocacy-based company providing multiple platforms to shift our dementia care culture from crisis to comfort all around the world. And we believe that by joining forces and sharing knowledge and just having everyday conversations about life with dementia and caring, that we're going to be able to remove some of the stigmas attached to memory loss and help those diagnosed and dealing with this disease continue to live with purpose. So I appreciate you joining us. I also need to thank all of our listeners, too, because one of our core beliefs here at Alzheimer's Speaks is about collaboration, and we really think the only way we're going to win this battle against dementia is to work together. And I know that that philosophy is working because of all of your likes and clicks and shares of Alzheimer's Speaks resources. You see, we were named the #1 influencer online regarding Alzheimer's, according to ShareCare and Dr. Oz. And that happened because you took those few seconds to share with your Facebook friends, your Twitter tribe, your Pinterest pals, and your LinkedIn colleagues. And it's really important to continue to pass information on regarding this disease, if it's Alzheimer's Speaks or another platform, because the more information we can have out there, the easier it will be for our sphere of influences to grab it when they need it. And, you know, everybody's on a different path with that, but they need to feel that it's normal and it's accessible. And that's a really simple way to do that. So again, thank you for caring enough to share our information with your groups. I also want to invite you to be on Alzheimer's Speaks, one of our platforms, and that could be our blog, it could be the radio show, maybe it's our dementia chats where our panel of experts actually have dementia, or our conscious caring resources. Reach out to me via alzheimersspeaks.com, and I'd be glad to have a conversation. We want to include everyone. So that means if you are diagnosed, if you're thinking you're having symptoms, if you are caring for somebody either personally or professionally, maybe you're a writer, an author, maybe you are a musician or singer, movie director, researcher, advocate, everybody is included. So would love to hear your story and your slant on the disease. Before I introduce our guest today, I do want to just throw out a couple of free offers to you. Audible, which is where you can get books downloaded that you can listen to, has a free trial, and all you have to do is go to audibletrial.com/ That's audibletrial.com /social. I said that wrong. audibletrial.com /social for a free 30-day trial. Or if you are looking for a new system to kind of keep you organized with the IRS, check out FreshBooks. You can get a free 30-day trial of FreshBooks by going to www.gofreshbooks.com /alive. gofreshbooks.com /alive. So let me introduce our guest today. I'm thrilled to have Dr. Lawrence T. Force with us. He is a gerontologist, and he has worked in the field of aging for over 30 years in a variety of different roles. He is also the founder and CEO of AgePlan, and a national, which is a national advocacy and training organization. And he has recently launched a national organization of adult Addictions and Recoveries, whose mission is to raise awareness and treatment and prevent addictions in adults, midlife and beyond. So this is a man who is just filled with energy and knowledge, and I'm so glad he's able to join us today. And we're going to be talking, our topic today is going to be talking about the detoxing of caregivers. So welcome, Dr. Forrest. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Lori, and thank you so much for this opportunity. I was thinking about this as I was preparing for our discussion. When we talk about how technology has impacted the aging world, you and I have never met, but we've worked on a number of projects together, and how we met was really through the use of technology.
Exactly.
I remember asking you to be a keynote speaker at a conference that we presented at the college. And there you were, coming in through Skype and being able to share your knowledge. So I think this is great, and I think I know this is not an infomercial, but hear me clearly. The work that you're doing and the mission that you've created is so vital and is so necessary.
Oh, well, thank you. That's
so
nice
thank
of
you
you
for
to
this
say.
opportunity.
Well, I'm very excited to have you with us today, and what I want to talk about, and before we kind of get off on our questions, it's always nice kind of for our audience to know, have you been personally touched by dementia through family or friends? It just gives people a little bit of a base as to where you're coming from.
Well, people ask me, professionally, I present myself as a gerontologist, one who studies the process of aging. And my youngest son, I have two sons. My youngest son asked me one time, well, why did you ever get involved in aging? Well, it's the most basic thing, it's something we all do. And then he asked me, what introduced? And then Nana surfaced. Nana was my grandmother, my father's mother, who lived with us after she became a widow. So from early on, I had been exposed to the needs and concerns and attitudes and behaviors of an older population. I went on to undergraduate work, studied psychology, graduate work, but I never really had thought about working in the Alzheimer's field. And as I tell my students today, it's all about connections, and sometimes it's just being at the right place at the right time. Mm-hmm. And I had a former student who was an adult, and the course finished. I was teaching as an adjunct, and the course finished, and he contacted me. And he was the director of personnel at a large, well-known rehabilitation facility on the East Coast in New York. And he said, look, we're going to start, this is back in '79, so we're going to start a medical model adult daycare program for Alzheimer's patients, and I'd like to know if you'd like to run it. I said, I don't really know much about Alzheimer's disease. He said, we'll teach you. So a career was born. So on a professional level, that's how I entered the field, and then did years in public service working with people with intellectual disabilities and psychiatric disorders that had Alzheimer's disease. But as that was moving on, I have an aging mother. My father died when I was 21. My mother just recently died last October. She was 97 years old, and she was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. But again, the good news is that I had somewhat of a knowledge base of the system, but it was still fragmented. My brother and I took her to her general practitioner, a wonderful lady. My mother loved her. We said we have some concerns, with memory loss and, the possibility of Alzheimer's disease. So she excused herself with my mother, and she took her into a back room. And 10 minutes later, she came back, and she said, no, your mother doesn't have Alzheimer's disease. She knew where she was, who the president was. And I asked her to count back from 100 to 0 by sevens, and she was able to do it. Well, my mother was in retail. She could have counted back by fractions if you had asked her. And I said to my brother, we're out of here. So we ended up going to a Burke Rehabilitation Memory Clinic, which I was familiar with, and ended up getting a proper diagnosis. And that's what's really necessary about getting a proper diagnosis. I think that my dissertation was on the impact of caregiving on accessing adult social model adult daycare programs. And I looked at the difference between husbands, wives, and daughters. And you could see the impact of kinship. I mean, although my brother and I were caregivers, we weren't. My father-in-law died 5 weeks ago, and my wife, he lived down on Long Island, about 90 miles from us, with my mother-in-law. And my wife and her sister, they were involved in a different process of caregiving. I mean, when you talked about caregiving from their perspective, it was different, and that was so clear in the dissertation work that I did. That husbands had a whole different take on what they meant by caregiving. Caregiving for husbands began when they couldn't drive. Caregiving for adult daughters or sons began, they knew where it began. They knew what they were wearing. They knew when the knock came on the door that life was going to be different. But caregiving for wives had a difficult time, at least that cohort had a difficult time in identifying what do you mean by caregiving? I've been doing this all along throughout my whole married life for this man. So it was completely different. I even see the relationship between my brother and I, what we did versus my wife and her sister-in-law. I never bathed my mother. I mean, there's a whole taboo about, those types of, ADL skills. Mm-hmm. We made arrangements. We were present. We drove. We did this. We accessed doctors. We got the best care. But we never did the ADL stuff that I saw my wife do and my sister-in-law do with my father-in-law. It's a whole different head. How this all came.
Oh, I was just going to ask you to explain ADLs because a lot of people don't know what that means.
Activities of daily living. Mm-hmm. So things like dressing, things like toileting, things like preparing food. There are measures that we use in standardized tests to look at activities of daily living, which are called ADLs, or instrumental activities of ADLs, which are IADLs, which are things like the use of the telephone, being able to use transportation. So the ADL skill set is one of the things we look at when we start to see how Alzheimer's disease compromises the functioning ability of the person. Mm-hmm. Okay. And how this all came about, and the work that I started to do, on the writing called The Detoxing of Caregivers, Key Tips for Survival, Strength, and Patience, was when we had made plans at the end of December to go to Florida for a couple of days of respite. And then things started to spiral. And we're exhausted. We're driving back and forth. We're being present. My father-in-law ended up end-staging his life, dying in his own home. There was a lot of hands-on type of thing. And we decided that it would be best that we not go for that trip. Mm-hmm. And as I was sitting there, as you said in my bio, I have an interest and been involved in launching this national organization of adult addictions and recovery for people over the age of 40 and above. And what I started to realize is the parallels between how the caregiver feels or how the person feels that is involved in the Alzheimer world in being present and the addiction world being present. I mean, the thing that I'm always taken by is the fact that in Europe, there isn't even such a thing as a caregiver. The word that's typically used is carer. It's not a formal role. You ask adult children about caregiving, they can tell you. But as I said, you ask wives in particular about caregiving, they're not really sure what you mean. Because they've been doing this, for quite some time. And what really hit me that night back in December of 15 is I was supposed to be sitting at Kennedy Airport, but instead I'm sitting in a Starbucks 90 miles away. And the reason is because of the fact that we made a decision which cost us not only emotionally but financially in making a last-minute decision of not going, that we weren't going to go, that we needed to be present. And what I started to realize is the similar patterns. Because in my private practice, what I see is, adults coming in, they have patterns of addiction. Typically, they're worn down, they're exhausted, they're scared, they're overwhelmed, they're unsure of the future. But then all of a sudden I realized that seemed to be very parallel to some of the individuals that were coming in that I see that are caregivers, being worn down, being exhausted, scared, overwhelmed, and not sure of the future. And what I argued for in that little essay was the fact that advocated for is the detoxing of caregivers. That if there are things that we can learn from other fields. I can even see it in the intellectual disability field, the patterns of care that we can learn that can be helpful for people that are older, or dealing with behavioral issues for people that have psychiatric disorders or intellectual disabilities. And you see one of the things happening now in nursing homes is that they're overwhelmed by the fact of, how do I go about dealing with the behavior management of somebody with Alzheimer's disease? The most embarrassing thing that happened to me, I worked for the public sector for years, for over 20 years. And one of the most embarrassing things that happened to me was just before I retired, is that we had an individual in New York with Pick's disease who was in a community living. Pick's disease, fast-acting form of dementia, has a hypersexuality component to it, has, some aberrant behavior. And we needed to get him out of that community setting. And there was nowhere in New York that was able to handle him. So we had to transfer him to Massachusetts. That's an embarrassment. There's holes in all parts of the system, whether it be residential or, day programs for how to deal with individuals that are addressing behavioral issues with Alzheimer's disease. But there are lessons that we can learn from the work that is being done in other systems. Years ago, director of one of these agencies that I work for in the state contacted me, and they asked me, did I see the profile that PBS did on Bill Thomas, Dr. Bill Thomas? Mm-hmm. And I hadn't, and that was way before downloadable links and stuff like that. So I contacted PBS, and I ended up getting the video and looked at it, and it was so powerful. It was so poignant. I mean, here's a man that, is running across the country, challenging nursing homes, tear down the walls, build small group homes. And part of it, he's very public about this, is because he has 2 children that are severely disabled. And that's how he entered into that world of, presence of care. And so I call him. And Dr. Thomas, Dr. Force, very powerful, thing. I work for the state, blah, blah, blah. I said, but I said, when it's all said and done, though, I said, can I ask you something? And he said, yeah. And I said, what you're promoting with the development of these small group homes were very similar to the system that we have been using for years in the intellectual disability world of coming out, deinstitutionalization, getting small group homes. And he said, can I tell you something? And I said, yeah. He said, that's what I am using. So there are lessons that we can learn in other settings about the things that are working well that we can then move into the arena that we're in. So whether it be intellectual disability, patterns, and aging, in this position, what I'm advocating for is let's take a look at how we go about caring for individuals that are overwhelmed, and then we detox them. We rehab them, and we develop some type of follow-up, community-based outpatient service. Mm-hmm. We need, and that can be very powerful because that's what I'm arguing for here, that as practitioners and program developers and policymakers, we need to take lead in creating new frontiers and creative solution-based opportunities to provide presence and care for the struggling caregiver. I mean, this idea that you might be a caregiver, the chances are you're going to be a caregiver. Mm-hmm. The chances are, I think now we're at the point of including caregiving as a developmental process of midlife and beyond. It's rare if you're not going to be a caregiver. Mm-hmm. And I think that, you have to be, prepared for it. I mean, we're in the mix. I mean, we have been, when I think back, when did caregiving start, for me? I've always been a son. So that was my first role, not caregiver, but son. But when I started to have to get involved in a place that, which I typically had not been involved, it was probably 17 years. So we're not talking a long weekend. We're talking about a big chunk of someone's life that you're actually devoting. I had a woman come to me in my private practice, and she had such a powerful line. And she had a husband that was diagnosed early on, and she came in and she had hip surgeries and shoulder replacement and all this from lifting. And she said something to me which was so powerful. She said to me, I've started to realize that I've devoted too much of my life to his care. Mm-hmm. That's a powerful statement. You know, I mean, look, we all hear stories. I sat on the Alzheimer board. We all hear, the local chapter. We all hear stories.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we have this expectation. I heard the story years ago. You know, this woman's diagnosed, and she brings the family together prior to announcing that she's been diagnosed, and she has them around the table in an elegant restaurant in New York, and she raises her glass and thanks them in on behalf of herself, thanks them ahead of time of what she knows that they're going to do for her.
Mm-hmm.
That's nice, and that's wonderful. But I've also heard the other side of the story, where spouses have divorced the other person, you know, when they found out that the diagnosis was there because they just couldn't do it. You know, I've heard the parts of the stories where, you know, it's like a double-barrel shotgun.
Mm-hmm.
Years ago, I did a piece called Adult Styles of Caregiving, Heroes, Martyrs, and Snakes. And those were the patterns that I saw. You know, the heroes did it because it had to be done. They just did it. The martyrs did it, and they let everybody know it was being done. And the snakes just slithered away. But then I realized that there was another group out there that I had not captured in that title. And I rewrote the essay, and I called it Adult Styles of Caregiving, Heroes, Martyrs, Snakes, and the Devastated. Because there are certain people that aren't present, not because they're snakes, but they just can't do it. They just can't watch the demise. You know, there are some people that can do it, and they weave it right into their everyday life, and this is not a big deal. Other people assume the role, and they let everybody know, and everybody in the family, how they feel overburdened or taking them upon or whatever. There are other people that are absent because they've made a decision, I'm not doing this, and they're out of there. But there are some people that just are not present, not because they're snakes. They just can't do it. They're just not equipped for it. Mm-hmm. And I think we have to understand that, you know, and as we take this lead, you know, and start to argue for and advocate for support systems for caregivers, you know, and policies. I mean, there can be work policies. You know, I remember years ago when, you know, companies were starting to be alerted to the fact that, hey, you know, if somebody's doing elder care, you know, we should be sensitive. And some of the major Fortune 500 companies were very sensitive. Work, you know, extensions, work, you know, changing schedules, the whole bit, being able to work from home. But one of the debates that came out of that is that's wonderful, okay, if you're providing care to an older person. But what happens if you've been sitting there for years as a good, solid employee, and you've been providing care to a child that's now 20 who has intellectual disabilities, and you're not getting a dime off, you're not getting a minute off. You're being held to, even though you're caregiving, okay, you're being held to a system that everybody else is being held to, but now, you know, the elder care button has been pushed, and now all sorts of bells and whistles are going off. There's something to be said about that. You know, as advocates, we need to, you know, argue for things that are equitable. Things aren't equal in this country. We have different access to services. We have different access to insurance, resources, the whole thing. But things have to be equitable, meaning that if it's available to one, it should be available to all. And I think as we start to look at this thing of caregiving, you know, I think we have to somehow get the message out there and providing care to people with Alzheimer's disease. But this is a normative process of development now. Mm-hmm. You know, insurance companies should be sensitive to it. One of the biggest blocking points we have across this country are zoning boards. Okay, we're a local zoning board where you want to ramp up your house and reconfigure it so you can take your parent in that has some type of dementia, and the next thing you know, you're being hauled into court because you violated a 1930 zoning ordinance that said you can't have two families in one house. I mean, I think that's where we really have to go with policy. I think that, you know, as we're starting to look at this, we realize that the caregiving is a personal process. It's interpreted uniquely. Each family system, every family system has stuff, and each family system handles it differently. Some families rally around. Some families, I've seen families holding each other, crying in the parking lots of nursing homes. I've also seen family members brawling in the parking lots of nursing homes because it has the ability to either bring families together or fragment them. I think that we have to recognize that there are other systems that we can learn from. We don't have to create a separate standalone network, and the system I'm looking at is, let's take a look at the addiction world and see how addiction and recovery have really started to, make some real inroads. I mean, one of the things, and see if there are parallel applications into the Alzheimer world. The beauty of where I sit as a practitioner and researcher is that I can have, across my career, I can have different interests without looking or feeling like I'm, what are you doing? So, yes, I spent a lot of time working in aging and intellectual disabilities and aging and Alzheimer's disease. And now I'm interested in aging and addictions. And it's exciting because you can get to see how these things, the parallels among the systems. There's things that we can learn, from other systems.
So can you give us some examples of the, addiction side versus the Alzheimer's caregiving side, where you might see some parallels?
And the addiction side, it's all about, bringing people together. It's about detox, stopping it, finding the person where they are, getting the treatment that they need, detoxing them, stopping the crisis as best as possible, moving them into some type of, rehabilitation. I'm not advocating to, take caregivers out of their world and rehab them for 30 days in some place like by the seaside. But there are themes that make sense. The addiction world talks about, detox, talks about rehabilitation, talks about fellowship, talks about community-based recovery, 12-step programs, surrounding yourself with, so caregiving can be very isolating. Okay, you know that as well as I do. Some family and friends, they rally around you. Others, they're long gone. They're just not there. Mm-hmm. And I think, as you start to look at this, one of the things that I've developed in my private practice, and I would encourage you and your listeners to take a look at this NOAAR, NOAAR.org, this national organization, because one of the paradigms we're using in that is a treatment approach that I developed. How it started is I was walking down the street of Manhattan in 2003. I was staying in the city overnight, going over to do a conference on Alzheimer's disease in Sweden. It was a spring night, beautiful night. At that point, I would smoke an occasional cigar and walking down the street, 10 o'clock at night, walking away from the hotel for about an hour or so, and boom, it hit me. And what hit me was the question I've been thinking about. Why is it that some people can make life look so easy and other people, everything is complicated? Now, whether it be whatever parts of life, whether it be caregiving or whatever. I mean, I have friends that have dealt with horrific life events and they've been able to master them and move forward. I also have friends that I've seen, whether it be their desk, their car, their life, their dining room table, everything is a problem. Everything is in chaos. Mm-hmm. And what I started to realize is that in the psychological theories to date, it's all been about stages. We all look at, what the person is doing in the stage of childhood and adolescence, and then we move up to adulthood. All the theories, the great theories of Erickson, or whether it be Freudian or whatever, they all have stages, as though it's linear, that it's like a little snapshot, and everybody's moving. But no one really talks about what's happening across the landscape, the width, what I call dimensions. Mm-hmm. And what I started to realize is that when clients come in, I tell them, whether they're dealing with caregiving issues or whether they're dealing with addiction issues, I tell them, look, number one, I'm not your hero. Mm-hmm. Number two, I'm not here to fix you because you're not broken. Okay, you're not broken. You're dealing with some developmental stuff and everything passes. So let's exhale. And what I've argued for, this theory that I've created is called the theory of dimensionality, meaning that there are different dimensions that occur across life. And what I'm saying here today to you is that caregiving is a dimension of midlife and beyond. And it doesn't mean it just starts in midlife. I have some college students that are providing caregiving or secondary caregiving status to their parents or grandparents. But in this theory of dimensionality, I've created a practice intervention because it's not just theoretical, and it's called dimensional solution-based treatment. And what that dimensional solution-based treatment argues for is let's move away from the traditional paradigm of biopsychosocial, and let's talk about what the traditional, what really is happening. Somebody comes in for psychotherapy, it is useless if they're not willing to make changes in other parts of their life. So one of the things that in this dimensional solution-based treatment has created this term holistic triage. But yeah, what you're doing is you're paying attention to the cognitive therapy. I do a little imagery stuff, little hypnotherapy stuff with them. But then I want them to work with a nutritionist. And I want them to belong to some type of exercise program on a regular basis. So it's the cognition, it's the energy, and it's the movement. Because I'm not powerful or magical enough to be able to change the person. But what I can do is I can encourage them to increase activities or patterns into their life where they will start to feel differently about themselves. Therefore, they will start to feel differently about the events around them or the people around them, whether or not they're dealing with addiction issues or caregiving issues. So a person comes in, I practice short-term work. I see them maybe 6-8 times. I want them to see me twice. I do some guided imagery, I do some psychotherapy, clinical hypnotherapy stuff. Then I want them to go and see this nutritionist. I like this nutritionist. I've been to nutritionists who are really not practicing what their profession is. I've been to nutritionists that are not caring for themselves, eating cookies in front of me, telling me to stay away from the white bread. That's not what I think is effective. What I think is effective is being a practitioner of practicing, doing what you say what you think works. So I want them to meet with this practitioner, with this nutritionist. If they don't want to meet with that one, they meet with one of their own. Mm-hmm. Then I want them to meet with this person that really emphasizes yoga. I don't care if it's yoga, Pilates, get a golden retriever where you can walk every day. But you can't come in continually saying how bad you feel about feeling bad while you're eating 16 bags of potato chips and drinking 14 Cokes a day. There's no magic here. Mm-hmm. You know, I've seen people that will run down to a drugstore like they're on fire because they're going to get a medication that's been prescribed. Yeah. But you say, hey, listen, why don't you go get a massage once a month with your wife? Or why don't you go for a walk 3 times a week? People, if you really want to change, you can change it. And what I'm seeing is that the patterns that occur in the interventions that occur in the world of addiction, let's get rid of the word addiction. Let's talk about the caregiver that's coming in with stress, mm-hmm. that's eating out of control, or not eating properly, or not paying attention to themselves, mm-hmm. or not. I mean, at some point, you can't care for somebody else if you're not caring for yourself. That's not science. That's a simple whatever. It's simple. It's common sense. And I think that, if you can start to think about, and I don't care, I'm not talking to you about the fact that you should go take a 28-day cruise. That's not possible when you're in the mix. But maybe a 28-minute walk. Mm-hmm. Maybe, somehow get involved in some type of exercise. I go to the gym every day. Okay, I've been doing it for the last 3 years. Okay, I'm 63 years old. Somebody asked me today, why do you go to the gym every day? I said, to keep my youngest guy off my shoulders. Okay, because he was all over me. Dad, you got to do exercise. You got to do exercise. I got to tell you something, Lori. It has been world-changing. I have gym buddies now. It's the socialization part of it. I do. Look, I'm not Arnold Schwarzenegger, but the fact is, I really look forward. It's part of my daily routine now. Mm-hmm. And the fact is that I think that if you're going into surgery, you have to really, do certain things in order to prepare yourself to get ready for it. I don't think caregiving should be a surprise. I think you have to prepare for it. I think you have to do things early on to bolster yourself because and I know. I mean, there were a lot of times that I was sitting, I'll never forget the time, my mother was in a hospital, 60 miles away from where we lived. I said to her, why don't you come live with us? She's like, I'm not going to the country. She was, very, very close to New York City. I'm driving back and forth, stuck on a parkway, eating like a cold sandwich. And I walk into her room at the hospital, and she's sitting there with the menu because she's going to order her food for tomorrow, and she's got this steaming hot plate sitting there. Mm-hmm. I started to laugh, because I'm eating a half-eaten bagel, and she's figuring out, does she want what carbs does she want with her starter? It can wear you down, and I think, one of the biggest, look, my mother died. She's a 97-year-old little Irish gal. I lost one of my biggest fans. I will never get over the death of my mother. I will never get over the grief and loss of her. Mm-hmm. But what I've learned how to do is try to live alongside of it. The fact is that as we're speaking right now, my wife is stuck on some parkway coming back from Long Island because she had to go down and take her mother, to the doctors for some type of, evaluation. Mm-hmm. We're in the mix. It's who we are today.
Well, I think one of the things that you're really pointing out is, you're talking about addiction, and you're talking about Alzheimer's, and you're talking about medications, and really you're talking about patterns of behavior. And patterns of behavior can be changed to a certain extent. But I think in society we are taught to believe on a subconscious level that it's not our fault. And I'm not saying that Alzheimer's is somebody's fault, don't get me wrong there, but when it comes to addictions and things like that, I think we have a little bit more control than what we like to believe sometimes. And it can be those little baby steps. And when it comes to Alzheimer's and dementia, we're taught to believe that they can't connect and that they don't remember us, so why show up? But, those patterns of behavior can be changed through subtle little things where all of a sudden we see, oh my gosh, there is a connection. Oh my gosh, this does make a difference. Oh my gosh, this I can control. This I can participate in, where we can't control it all, but it gets us focused on who we are and what are our abilities and how does that affect us. Like even when you mentioned going to the gym, you went basically to get your younger son off your back. and yet he taught a brilliant lesson by pestering you enough so that you saw the impact that had on your life. It wasn't just about exercise. It was about social engagement. It was, about probably feeling healthier on probably physical, mental levels, all of those types of things. But it becomes a pattern of your life, and those patterns control our behaviors and our outcomes. And I don't think that we look at those things seriously as we should. The other thing that came to mind when you were talking about addiction and dementia and the different things that are used, one of the things I hear from people all the time is with our memory cafe. Oh, this kind of reminds me of an AA meeting. Because people are coming together in community. It's not about embarrassment. It's about being your authentic person, the good, the bad, the ugly, and you can share it all and still be safe and still be supported, and allowing people to be wherever they are, and helping lift them to move forward. But it's not really one helping another. It's everybody helping one another. So no one's better than another. It's that equal ground.
But you and I could speak for hours because we understand each other, because we've been there too.
Yep.
I tell somebody that hasn't been a caregiver about some of the feelings I've had or some of the issues or vignettes or whatever. They're looking at me like they landed on Mars. Mm-hmm. I saw this clip not too long ago, about a month ago, and it was a summary of this statement of this article. And it said, "Hey, look, smoking, bad, try to stop. Red meat, bad, try to stop. But more important than eliminating smoking and eliminating red meat is the importance of the power of socialization. That if you want to create and enhance longevity, it's all about meaning and purpose and staying connected. We know that. The fact is that, this idea of isolating, and there's a lot of stereotypes out there too. I'm not against nursing home care. Okay, it's not like all nursing home care is bad. That's not true.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, some of it is wonderful for the person because of the socialization process that they lived on their own. Now, I don't believe that, once a diagnosis occurs, it's a knee-jerk reaction, but I don't think anything in the community should be taken off the table as a possible option.
Mm-hmm.
Because I've seen more people die in isolation where families have tried to keep the person at home when in fact they're not equipped to do it. They don't want to do it. The person didn't want to do it. They were concerned about the burden on the family, and they were completely isolated.
Mm-hmm.
And it's almost similar to the days of deinstitutionalization when we thought, let's deinstitutionalize everybody into the community, only to find out that the communities in some cases were more isolating than the institutional grounds and the institutional systems.
Mm-hmm.
So there are lessons. I think the takeaway, and I really appreciate this opportunity to have this discussion, but there are lessons that we can look at from other systems, and what's worked, and then you pick and choose what works, and you leave the rest.
Yep. Yeah.
But I think this idea of just like caregivers should not be surprised that they're going to be caregivers, I think all individuals should not be surprised that the chances are if they live longer, they're going to be possibly wrestling with some form of dementia, and how are they going to handle it?
Mm-hmm.
I know for a fact that where I live, there's zero way that I'm going to be able to age in place. I grew up in a city right outside of Manhattan. I could have lived and died, walked and died. I could have shopped, died, everything in the area that I lived in. Now I live 90 miles from New York in a much more rural setting. There's zero chance that I'm going to be able to age in place here once I'm no longer able to drive. I got that. And I don't want my kids wrestling me down the street trying to get my car keys away from me. So I know that at one point when I was 16, I had the privilege of driving. But I know at some point I'm going to probably have to give that privilege up.
Mm-hmm.
And in order to do that, I'm probably going to have to change the situation of where I live so I can access community, public transportation. No big deal, no surprise.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that, as a society, here's the benefit of aging. You're living longer. But as a society, I think we have to prepare to live longer in a more productive way,
mm-hmm.
and not be so surprised by these things that occur in families.
Yep, I agree. Well, I can't believe this hour has just flown by, Larry.
I know.
How can people get a hold of you? What's the best way for them to get a hold of you? Well,
they can drop me an email. The email address is drltforce, FORCE @gmail. They can follow me on Twitter, drforce, or LinkedIn, same thing. But I'm available. You know how to reach me, and I look forward to continuing this discussion.
Wonderful.
I really do. You're doing great work, Lori. And as I said at the beginning, that's not an infomercial. That's straight out. You're doing great work.
Oh, well, thank you.
And anything I can help to promote it, let me know.
Well, I appreciate that, and I love the work that you are doing as well. And I hope we'll have some collaborations here in the future. So that would be wonderful. That. Great.
Beautiful.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Lori. Many thanks.
Thank you.
All right, bye now.
Bye-bye. Again, for our listeners here, don't forget to take advantage of your free trials for Audible. It'd be audibletrial.com/social, where you can check out 180,000 titles to choose from for some great reads. Sunday night, you might want to check out Apples to Apples here live on Alive and Social. And I just want to note some of our past shows that we had. On Tuesday, we had the author of the book entitled Calmer Waters, The Caregiver's Journey Through Alzheimer's and Dementia. That's Barbara Cohn. We had a really interesting conversation. Her book is loaded with great resources. We also had the co-founder of GrandPad on, which is a technology that helps families connect in a comfortable fashion. And then we discussed sports concussions and dementias. Our last Dementia Chats was on July 12th, and we discussed the impact of words. And we just talked about the words dementia and demented, and also advocacy and how those with dementia are planning on kind of passing the wand on to the next guy to step up and keep their work going. On June 28th, Dementia Chats, we discussed the importance and the impact of routines and some travel tips. And our next session will be July 26th, and that is open to the public. It's free. So if you're public or professional, please check that out. And then our last conscious caring resource was with founder Vince Zangaro, and he is the founder of the Alzheimer's Music Fest, which will go live August 6th down in the Atlanta area. If you're going to be in Iowa in August, I will be down there August 10th. We're going to be doing a free screening of his neighbor Phil at the Mind Frame Theater in Dubuque. And I'll also be speaking at the Northeast Iowa Community College down there. Last, I just want to point out a couple of articles you might be interested on the blog. Kevin Wu wrote an article about Pat Summit, since she just passed here. There's a beautiful poem that was submitted by somebody in our community called 56 Years, and it's a daughter writing about her journey with her mom. And Carol Larkin had a great article on kind of some spooky statistics on the lack of healthcare staff to meet our aging demands. If you are dealing with somebody with dementia and you're worried that they might wander, you may also want to check into the Caregiver Alert Center, and you can find them on our homepage. It's under $15 a year to be set up and ready to go for just in case of an emergency, because you just quite never know. In the meantime, sign up to be a member on alzheimersspeaks.com. That way you can go ahead and access all of our free tools as well. We'll talk with you next week. Thanks, everyone.
It's time to rethink, renew, and reimagine retirement. Hey, everybody, Jared Sebesta here, host of Retire Repurposed. Now, this podcast is about the non-financial parts of retirement, which many times can be even more challenging than the financial. We believe retirement is not the end, rather the beginning of what could be the most impactful, purposeful, and fulfilling season of a person's life. So don't retire, become repurposed. To listen now, search Retire Repurposed on your favorite podcast platform, Senior Resource, or Life Audio.